Good morning, everybody. Sorry about that.
Okay,
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to OMNIA's meeting of building a new reality. We will still have a few people coming in while we wait, so we'll hear the dings, and Benjamin will let them in as they come in. Good. It is good to have you join us today. And I want to say my name is Shanta Premvardhana. I need to adjust my name here. It says OMNIA. I will do that in a minute. I serve as the president of OMNIA Institute for Contextual Leadership. Again, thank you for coming in. I want to offer a disclaimer right at the beginning, just so you all know. This is an open and a public conversation. And it will be on Facebook Live as well. So it will be on Facebook Live as well, just so you know that that is the case. We have probably 70 people on this call. So that's it's a lot of people, and that means that we may not be able to speak. Everybody may not be able to speak or participate because of the time that we have. We will try to manage our time as well as we possibly can. But as you know, it is not going to be an easy task to get as many voices as possible in the short time we have. So I want to be sure that everybody stays muted during this period until you are able to.
Okay, so maybe I'll make some comments. Good morning and welcome again. I think Shanta has some technical issues and he's going to join us.
Back. He's back now.
Back to you, Shanta.
Oh, we can't hear him.
Okay. So warm welcome to everybody. My name is Soraya Dean. I work with the OMNIA Institute also for Contextual Leadership.
Can you hear me?
Thank you, Shanta. Okay, I was just trying to fill in the gap.
Okay.
Welcome back.
I was just putting this on Facebook Live. That's what happened. So it took a short break to do that.
Welcome. We're glad you're back.
Okay. Thank you, Soraya. So many of you may not know much about OMNIA or what we do. So we have a short video, very short, 2 minute long, for you to see, so that it will give you at least some brief idea about what we do. So ask your indulgence and watch this short video. Go ahead, Benjamin. By the way, I want to introduce Benjamin to you. Benjamin, please wave. He is the one who you need to talk to in case you run into any technical difficulties. Go ahead with the video, Benjamin.
We long for freedom, and we oppress others to secure it. We wish for security and are willing to win it through domination. We pray for peace and are willing to inflict violence to get it. And so you have to wonder, oppression, domination, violence, isn't this the very definition of extremism? At OMNIA, we believe freedom, security, and peace begin when we look at our own religious beliefs and values, when we find common ground, and when we recommit to loving our neighbors as ourselves. And so we go to places where peace is most fragile. And from those places, we create interfaith peacemaker teams to build change from within. It's working in Nigeria, where OMNIA's interfaith peacemaker teams, Christians and Muslims, are helping to stop young people from joining Boko Haram. It's working in Chicago, where pastors are teaching communities what loving your neighbor looks like. It's working in Sri Lanka, where interfaith peacemaker teams are helping religious leaders of all faiths honor and understand old beliefs and build new ones together. OMNIA is building interfaith peacemaker teams here and around the world, and we want you to join us in that effort. If you believe that freedom, security, and peace belong to everyone, then let's team up.
That video was made by our colleague Vince Eisner about a year ago, and it describes our work in different parts of the world, particularly Nigeria, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. What we do, we are a peace-building organization. What we do is build interfaith peacemaker teams in these different parts of the world. And so in some of the most difficult places in the world, that's what we do. I want to begin this conversation by framing this series. Take a minute to do that. I want to refer you to a famous Indian author whose work has inspired me. That is Arundhati Roy. I don't know if you know her, but it's worth getting to know her if you don't. Here's a quote from her. "Our strategy should be not to confront empire, but to lay siege to it, to deprive it of oxygen, to shame it, mock it, with our art, our music, our literature, our stubbornness, our joy, our brilliance, our sheer relentlessness, and our ability to tell our own stories, stories that are different from the ones we are being brainwashed to believe." After a couple of other paragraphs, she says, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. That's from Arundhati Roy. You know, in the past few months, we have heard her breathing. What happened here in the United States following George Floyd's murder, and even this weekend with Mr. Brooks in Atlanta, then nothing, and what followed those were nothing short of phenomenal. But as I travel in different parts of the world, I also notice the urgent desire to break free from oppression, which is palpable in many places. She is breathing in Nigeria and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, where we work. I want to say that our OMNIA conversation is an exercise in contextual learning. It is not a lecture and question and answer period. We are all simultaneously learners and teachers. We are storytellers, poets, imaginers of a new reality. We are analyzers, strategizers, planners, and implementers. We are asking the following questions in this series. We are asking, what does this new reality look like? What are its values? What problems does it want to solve? And perhaps more importantly for us, what is OMNIA's unique contribution to building such a new reality? We need your wisdom, we need your insight, your stories, your struggles to weigh in on these questions. And that is the purpose of this conversation. And so we will have an initiator and a responder, and then we will have a first responder, and then we will have you all respond. They need to be short responses because of the number of people we have online here. But Soraya Dean will manage that part of our time and moderate that part of our time. But we want to hear from you. Because the time is short, we want only 1 or 2 or 3 sentences from you. If you need to elucidate a point, or if you need to illustrate something, please use the chat feature so that so that you can write more at length, and you must feel free to write to me in an email whatever other details you would like to share. I want to be sure that you know that those comments will be taken very seriously. With that, I want to introduce Reverend Osagyefo Sekou. Reverend Sekou is one of us. As you probably know, OMNIA was an organization called SCOOP before, Seminary Consortium for Urban Pastoral Education. And Sekou, Reverend Sekou, was a part of our faculty at one point. He is a radical Baptist minister, as all Baptist ministers ought to be, I think. But he takes very seriously Jesus' commandment to love your neighbor as yourself. He's a writer, he's a theologian, he's a singer, he's a hip-hop artist. He's many things rolled into one. He is one who works tirelessly to dismantle white supremacy. So in 2014, August, he went to Ferguson to help organize the young people there, to help them and train them in nonviolent civil disobedience. And then he went to Charlottesville in 2017. And then today he's been in Minneapolis during this period, but right now today he's in Seattle. As you probably know, that there is a thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone that's going on there, and they've invited him over there to help organize that activity. Reverend Sekou, you are my beloved brother. It's so good to have you with us. Would you please share with us your insights, your stories, struggles from the streets of Minneapolis and elsewhere? Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you, Brother Shanta. And good morning to all of you all. It is quite early where I am. I believe we and God are the only people who are up now. And I have not had coffee. And so at some point you may see me jump over to this to the stove and pour this French press because I'm hurting pretty bad. As I think about, I just want to make one correction. I have served Baptist churches, but I am actually, I'm going to work backwards. One of the reasons that I'm here in Seattle is that I was intrigued by the, what they're calling CHOP now, the Capitol Hill Occupy protest, or this autonomous zone. In theology, we have this notion of the eschaton, this eschatological hope. What is it that we are after when it's all said and done? When in the Christian tradition, Jesus cracks the sky. And so part of that for me is that there's a certain kind of possibility here. And as I walked through this multiracial space on yesterday, as soon as I arrived, in which homeless people are being fed, where I see people having psychic breaks and the police not dealing with it, but community members dealing with, clergy with an interfaith chapel, a memorial that it is indeed holy ground, and that it looks unlike what we're used to things looking like. It does not carry with it the certain kind of air of the established state. And so one of the questions for us then is, how do we consider this moment, and how do we consider this moment, and how do we think through the possibilities of defunding the police, which is the cry of the people? What are the ways in where the Bible says that where your treasures are, so is your heart. And so if your heart is in such a place that it spends over 50% of its city budget on policing, if your heart is in a place that you've actively defunded public education, you've actively defunded healthcare, you've actively militarized your police, of which I've been subject to the militarization of police, not only in Ferguson, but also as a teenager, right? what are the ways in which we begin to reimagine the possibility? In Islam, it talks about the deen is being made, right? It's not a thing that you arrive at. In Nicho Shoshin Buddhism, it says, I devote myself to the mystic laws of cause and effect through sound, right? That there are these repercussions about the desires of our hearts in which they play themselves out. And in Christianity, we talk about Paul saying those of us who are being saved. So whatever process we come up with, defunding the police or new possibilities of the world, we'll be engaging what Reinhold Niebuhr called them proximate solutions to insoluble problems. So we won't ever have all of the answers, but nevertheless, we must try. And so this particular historical moment, we're presented with the opportunity of Kairos, of God breaking into history, as articulated particularly in Paul Tillich's work on an interpretation of history, or what Elaine Bardou in his book Being an Event, that the l'envant, that something's happened in history. And that Bardou necessitates that we become militants of truth. So I want us to think through what are the possibilities of the world. And then for you, how will you show up, right? Like in liberation theology, they talk about the preferential options of the poor. So what are the preferential options of the poor? Do you use your sanctuaries as safe spaces that won't let police in to attack protesters? Will you feed people through mutual aid? Will you, as religious creatures, be willing to go on the street and put your bodies on the line for those who Jesus called the least of these? And so I do believe that we're in this particular moment to have these questions wrestled with. And so I'm going to shut up now and make a little coffee and listen to you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Sekou. Please do get your coffee. But this is really the question for us. How do you imagine this new eschaton, new reality? How do you live into this Kairos moment? That's the question that you are raising for us, and that's the question that's been on our mind. Thank you for your comments, and I want to go now to Dr. Afri Atiba. Afri has been a part of our faculty at Scoop for a long time. She was with the Center for African American Theological Studies at the time, and she continues on our resource team and on our advisory board. Afri, would you pick up from here and offer our first response?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing this morning? Hopefully everyone is well. And I'm glad to see everybody here. Everyone can hear me fine, right? I'll start by saying that I am a simple person and I come from a simple background, basically. I too was an ordained minister in the Pentecostal tradition. Before that, I was Baptist. I have a love for people. And I've always had a love for people. And that's probably how I ended up in the ministry and ended up in seminary, trying to find answers, always trying to find answers. We're at a state now that I'm ready for these answers. We've asked lots and lots of questions. I certainly have. I'm old enough to remember several riots from the time that I was a little girl, in the 60s, actually. And I remember the riots, and I remember, the only thing I remember as a little girl is, why are white people killing Black people? And because I was a child, no one gave me the answers at that time. And so I've always kind of been asking, what is going on in our world? Why is this happening? You know, why is this happening? And so because of my love for people, I went into the ministry and I said, I'm going to find these answers. I'm sustained by the love of God. This I know. And if we asked, one question that Shanta asked us was about our theologies. And I know there's more than Christians here on the line, but we all have to ask these questions. Are our theologies helping us, or are our theologies failing us? Have they failed us? I can say this about Christian theology, what the Christian theology that I know through the Black church. At this point, I feel like it has failed us. It has failed us. And not completely. The Black church has always been there for us. I feel as a place of where we could social gather, where we can meet, where we could plan our meetings, plan our form of attack or peace protests and all those types of things. But our basic theology hasn't changed much. And I'm not sure that it has served us well in progressing to the next step. So there's many answers to these questions. But what I say is our foundations of our theologies have to be looked at more. Our sacred texts have to be looked at, the way we interpret our sacred texts. And I am also a Bible scholar. And I've taught a Bible class that is disruptive. I've taught tools and how to interpret the Bible so that we can come to some theologies that are freeing, that are liberating. For me, it's sort of like a foundation. Our young people have left pretty much the church, pretty much religion, pretty much foundations of kind of love and hope. They're just out there. How do we bring them back together? How do we come back together? How do we love again? How do we use love as that foundation to propel us out of these situations that we found ourselves in, that we find ourselves in today? So I don't have a lot of answers, but I know that we've got to examine a lot of things. Each of us, we all have a role to play. We each have a small part in this, depending on our backgrounds, depending on our love of whatever it is our discipline is. My love for theology, my love for people, my love for biblical interpretation, my love for liberation. We all have those particular areas, and that we all have to pitch in to do our part to get us through this. Because I keep hearing people saying that we're joining the fight. We're joining the fight. I no longer want to join the fight. I want to win the fight. It's time to win the fight. And so I'm happy for this conversation. I'm happy that we can all add a part so that we can build some new foundations in the church, in several different religions, in our communities and all. We have to do some serious examinations so that we can get a little further down the road and we can win this fight. So that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you, Afri. Appreciate your pointing us to a critical question that is in front of us. So let me just frame our conversation just a bit and hand over to Soraya. One of the questions that we as an organization have been thinking about a great deal is the distinction between the precise question that Afri has been raising, and Sekou raised for us before. Sekou is now talking about some very practical outworkings of that, but Afri is asking the theological question. We had said to ourselves that our received theological traditions often get us in trouble because they have at least two things that are built into it, as we reflected on it previously. One is exclusivity. That is the idea that my way is right and your way is wrong, or I am saved and you are not saved, and therefore I'm going to heaven and you're not. The other is supremacy. Supremacy is, of course, the idea that says I'm better than you, that we are all in some hierarchical order, and these people are better than those people. That idea is those are two things that are ingrained into our received theological traditions. And therefore we said we need to flip. That is, if received theology is oriented from top to down, from top to bottom, we need to think of a theology that arises from the bottom to the top. And that we call contextual theology. We take the questions, we begin our theological conversation with the questions and the struggles that arise from the ground. So the questions around defunding police is the question that leads to a theological conversation. The questions about why are police killing black people, that question, or why is there systemic racism, or why is there what's going on in our neighborhoods, those are the questions that leads to to a new theology, because it arises from the bottom, not from the top down. That's been a principle that we've carried, and which of course then goes to mean that today, right now, this conversation, you all are the context. Therefore, we need to listen to you and your perspective, your struggle, your question. And I want to then hand over to Soraya to moderate this part of our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanta. This is a moment where we have to remember Dr. King's words. He said, I have a dream, but it is like we are having a nightmare in our country. It's the lowest moment in our history. We are exposing the myth that we have no race challenges. We do. This is a huge spiritual and moral awakening. And for me personally, taking my 17-year-old daughter to protest rallies and participating in my own protest rallies, I think it is a moment where we all have this opportunity to be a part of history and write that history. And as my sister Afri quite well said, let us not just join, let us win. And what is unique about what is going to happen in this segment is the OMNIA's methodology of hearing from the people at the grassroots, bringing your concerns and your questions out. So we invite you to write your questions or raise your hand and bring it to the discussion. We want to hear from you, and we want to be able to respond or acknowledge your question. For the next 20 minutes, we will be in a robust engagement of what you have to say. So as you, are we having those questions rolling in, Shanta?
We have, no, not questions, Soraya. We have Satyasilan Kadragama, who has raised his hand. So let's call on him to say a word. Satyan.
Yeah, Reverend Kadirgama, all the way from Sri Lanka. Tell us, what are your concerns and what do you wish to share with us?
You have to unmute.
You may need to do that.
Unmute.
I clicked the button, but he has to approve it and approve on their end.
So while we wait for him, please bring forth your insights, your questions. Tell us what you think that needs to happen moving forward. Hello? Reverend Kadirgama, are you there?
I'm sorry?
We can't seem to unmute him.
Oh, okay. So
I don't know why that is.
Okay.
He has to do that, I think, and he may not.
Oh, I think he's unmuted now.
Okay.
Satyan, do you have something to say? I'm not sure he's there. I'm going to
So that,
go ahead.
Can I speak now? Are you hearing?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
we
okay,
can.
go ahead.
We can hear you well. Please speak.
That is,
Please raise your hands if you have questions and insights and concerns as we wait for Reverend Kadirgama to sort out some technical difficulty.
I'm going to.
Okay. I'll send him a private message saying that we're having issues.
Yes, clearly we are having some technical issues. I think the connection from Sri Lanka. He's calling in all the way from Sri Lanka. Thank you, Reverend Kadirgama. We appreciate your presence today. And who else has a question or a concern or an insight to bring to this discussion? Please raise your hands or write it out for us. We will explore it. Okay, so we have received any questions yet.
Hand raise is not.
I'm going to ask my sister
Larry,
Afri.
wait a minute. Sorry, Larry Greenfield has a question. Please unmute Larry and raise that. You have to.
I want to see if I'm right in hearing from Seattle. If I heard you right, it is that there are two essential values, fundamental values, that are a part of a new reality, that have to be present in a new reality. First, nonviolence, and secondly, inclusion. Is that a fair reading of what you were presenting this morning from Seattle?
Thank you. Reverend Sekou, you want to give us a short response to that? Or the very important question. Should nonviolence...
Okay. Now, I'm an old man, so I don't really know how all this technology works. So give me the question once again.
Are two of the essential values of a new reality, one, nonviolence, that is the emerging reality has to be one of nonviolence, and secondly, it must be inclusive of everyone.
Mm-hmm. So I want to wrestle with what we mean by nonviolence, right? Because, and I'm not accusing you of this, but a lot of the public discourse has been focused on the destruction of property. And so I want to begin because in a civilization that wants to own people as an a priori, I want to be sophisticated in our analysis of what we mean when we are concerned about the destruction of property, right? That we used to own people in the United States. And so when we begin to make equivalent property and to make equivalent property and to make equivalent to the life of people being lost, I just want to caution on that and that kind of quiet violence, the kind of quiet terror of systematic oppression. For instance, in Minneapolis, the police station that was burned in the third precinct, that precinct published shortly thereafter an article in the Star Tribune in Minneapolis. It was a playground for the most violent and abusive police officers. So when the building is burned, it is a targeted burning, right? And so so I just want to keep track of when we think about nonviolence and the question of property destruction. I want to just keep track of that. I'm not evaluating it or don't want to belabor it, but I want to raise the question. And so then when we construct this future of nonviolence, is that future of nonviolence predicated on what King's notion of negative peace, or is it predicated on the possibilities of the construction of a society where everybody got something to eat, they got a place to stay, they got access to a decent education, the policing forces are not occupied? So that nonviolence is a structural concern, right? The structures look nonviolent, right? And then in terms of, and the inclusion of everyone, right? Part of one of the challenges that I've been wrestling with, right, has to do with how do we construct a civilization in which people all are welcome. And that I do believe, and I have a manuscript where I'm wrestling with this question, there is something about the nation state that requires people who are in and who are out. Who count and don't count. There's something about the construction And it could be we should be suspicious of anything that comes out of the Weimar Republic that ultimately gives us the Holocaust, this ideal of the nation state. And so there's something about who you say belong or who doesn't belong that kind of breeds a certain level of militarization, whether it be existential and epistemic or militarized, about the construction of borders. And so one of the things is that how we create a society that has systems of nonviolence in place that help augment the possibilities of actual violence. And then what does it look like in terms of the kind of societies that we're constructing in which people are in and out? It's real curious to me. And then lastly, I just saw on that track, I know that in the chat, I know that racism does seem irretractable. But I don't want it to lead to a kind of quietism, but rather than that, how do we struggle in spite of, right? Because with all the contradictions of America, the old saints who raised me would say, I'm not what I was and I'm not what I'm going to be. So the nation is not what it was. Right? It's not as bad off as it was. But it's on the way somewhere. You know, Paul talks about those of us who are being saved. So I'm not romanticizing the past, right? Because in the sense that when was America ever great, right? So I'm not romanticizing the past, but I'm also saying that there are, that there are some differences that should be paid attention to. And so nonviolence as in terms of a structural consideration, what are the possibilities and I think that has to do with how we structure our societies in terms of who we're in and out. And that lastly, that the racism might be ever present, but I do not believe that it's irretractable.
Thank you, Reverend Sekou. In the interest of time, I'm going to call on Anita Raghavan. I think she wants to share some insights with us. Anita, you will unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Go ahead, please.
Actually, my comment was that somehow I couldn't find a raise hand button, but that's fine. I just put a chat. I was actually, I don't even know quite how to phrase this, and it's probably a more practical thing than philosophic. I was wondering if we looked at large corporations that we participate in, that we buy things from, if we can get them to give us how many people they employ, what is the racial breakup, what is the gender breakup, have that all listed, and then do our own sort of, not exactly encouraging boycott, but just making this known. And so if we have like rival businesses that seem to be more egalitarian, maybe, you know, we just put subtle pressure to say, hey, you're going to employ more people of a specific race or gender. That seems kind of simplistic, but you know, in this country, money talks.
Yes, yes. And I must add, that was one of the powerful tactics Dr. King used. I was reading his book, Where Do We Go From Here? He was very, very, very strategic about using that strategy that you just mentioned, Anita. Thank you so much. So in the interest of time, I'm going to read Ken Bedell's question. He also talks about violence. He says the fundamental issue of today is the role of violence in America today. This commitment to violence is the tool of global capitalism. OMNIA can lead discussions on what violence is and how it functions and become a part of an internal and how it has become a part of our internal and unacknowledged values. So true. Mervyn DeMello says we need to make the channels for building bridges. Channels for building bridges. I'm Indian, based in the US, belonging to grassroots Catholic tradition. I like Roy's idea of the use of arts, music, action. How do we build bridges to faith with one another through culture? We also need common understanding of concepts such as nonviolence, inclusion, peace building, bridge building, and defunding. Yeah, I think as long as we defund, pay 50% of our city's budgets to the law enforcement and maybe fund some of these art projects, perhaps we can achieve those results you mentioned, Mervyn. Then John Kenyon says, given that racism in America is inextricable from economic growth, what solutions does BLM offer to the 9% of economic security, health and food security, education and reform, and the like? I'm wondering whether Afri can respond, give a short response to that. He wants to know what the Black Lives Matter movement can offer to the 9% of economic security, health, and food reform in the United States.
I'm not real sure. That's a good question. I would have to think on that in terms of Black Lives Matter. Offering economic growth. I'm not sure.
Okay.
May I?
On that.
Yes, please do.
All right, so if there's a platform put out by the Movement for Black Lives, which is kind of the overarching coalition that emerged out of the Black Lives Matters movement. And in that platform, there are a number of critiques around money on war, investment in communities, and that kind of thing. And so I think that BLM offers is actually one part of a broader coalition, and it is part of also a trajectory of struggle, right? And so everything from the Fellowship of Reconciliation's work around a peace tax in which money does not, and conscientious objection, to Martin Luther King's call for guaranteed income, that there is so it's part of a tradition of struggle that oftentimes is a multiracial coalition struggling against the various forms of which capitalism conscribes certain life opportunities. And so it's not only the workers, but the Movement for Black Lives, a policy statement lays out a lot of these contradictions. And I do believe that we do have to create a struggle around what capitalism is, right? And this, for those of us functioning in the global South, oftentimes our new governments absorb it kind of hook, line, and sinker. And so part of it is the inextricable link, right? Because the development of capitalism created in the United States from the dispossession of Native American land and the conquering of the natural environment combined with the enslavement of African people. And so we want to just keep track of that, I think, about how does capitalism in itself function, and then how in our religious traditions do we wrestle with the role of capital at the same in the face of the admonitions of our holy text to care for the most vulnerable.
Thank you. There's a very interesting question from Dawn, a question that most of my white friends are also asking. How can I, as a privileged white woman, be the best ally to my siblings of color in this moment in history? Afri, you want to respond to that?
Soraya, if you call me one more time.
You're in trouble. I'm in trouble. Okay, got it.
Oh God, what was the question again?
Dawn wants to know. Of course, she mentions our criminal justice system is so broken, and that is a non-issue. It is, we all know that. But here's a question that most of my friends are asking also. That is, how can I, as a privileged white woman, be the best ally for my siblings of color in this moment of history?
Well, I would think to study history. That would be number one. Study African American history. Study history of the struggle of people, of minority people. Because I think many times this they operate out of ignorance when they say all lives matter, or, you know, everything is fine. Can we just all get along? But I found in this struggle that many people, many white people, really don't know the history of the struggles of minority people. And once they learn it, or once they see it, once they start to study it, then they go, oh, it's like the light bulb comes on. It's like they get a revelation, you know. Wow, I didn't know all of this. Even like the community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black community that was burned down to the ground. I was shocked to learn that history was never taught to anybody, even the young Black people that were in Tulsa right after that. Many people didn't even know about it. So, you know, many white people didn't know about it outside of Oklahoma. So I think basically just to get in there and to learn the history, learn all of everyone's history.
Thank you. And as I have you here, I just want to ask you, do you see this as a moment for women to rise more strongly and raise our voices more powerfully? Do you see this as a moment for a movement led by women also?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Have Dawn
Especially
respond
Soraya.
to that question, Soraya?
Sorry?
Have Dawn respond to that question, your question.
Oh,
Oh.
okay. Is Dawn able to unmute herself and
Jump in there.
okay, then we also have a question from Charlene Hill.
She's got it. She's got
able
it.
to, okay.
Yeah.
Would you mind repeating the question?
Oh, so the question I asked Afri was, do you see this as a moment for a movement where women come together in a more powerful, organized way to address the issues that we are facing, the moral and spiritual issues we are facing in the United States today?
I believe this is a moment, certainly in U.S. history, that women can rise with much greater voice to be heard. You know, just with the Me movement and other things like that, women have begun to rise up. Certainly for me as a clergy person, I need to tap into my prophetic voice more in my preaching, in community, to drive the course of history. I think there is a huge possibility we can no longer sit in the shadows and be meek and mild. It just, change and transformation cannot take place if any of us take a back seat right now.
Right. There's a role for every one of us, right? Yes. And that might be from writing a letter to making a phone call to showing up for a rally and agitating for legal reform. Yes, I see that. Thank you so much. Yes. And then Charlene says, I think it's unfair to ask Black people what to do. I like the phrase, do the work. I think learn and get involved. It's, there were more questions that came in. So what you're saying, Charlene, do you want to speak?
I guess I could.
Yes.
I think I read somewhere it's almost like an aggression to put that question. I think when people ask the question, it feels disingenuous because I think there's plenty to do. You don't have to ask us what to do. I mean, if you do the work, if you read, if you're critically aware, if you're watching TV, just do something. Have lunch with someone, but don't put the onus of that question on those that are oppressed. Get out there and get involved. I think sometimes when people ask the question, it's just really a way to not do anything.
Right. I agree with you. I also believe in this phrase, an activist is somebody who sees the river is dirty, gets into it and cleans it, kind of. That's what you're saying. You see it, so do something about it. Thank you.
I want to push us with the phrase by the great Ruby Sales, who talks about, and because I actually reject the term ally. I think it is actually a feature that comes out of the late 90s, particularly around multiculturalism, which is about rearranging, making the chairs on a sinking Titanic more colorful. And so I want to push white folks to think of themselves as freedom fighters, meaning that an ally can check in and out, but a freedom fighter got blood in the game. And excuse the violent metaphor, but the reality is this here. Until white folks believe that they shot their son in less than 3 seconds playing in a park in California, or that in Cleveland, or they left their son in the street baking for 4.5 hours in Ferguson, or that their son called for their dead mother on the streets of Minneapolis as they were losing their life. Until they believe that, then we don't have a full-on commitment. And so what are the ways in which we're going to struggle together, and that part of people who are subject to anti-Black racism, that they understand that white supremacy puts them in moral danger, that it does something to their souls, and so that they need to be saved themselves. And we Pentecostal talked about working out our soul salvation. And so that the struggle against white supremacy is a spiritual struggle. It's a jihad, if you will, that you're going to be working against it because your own salvation is bound up in it. And so that when you understand yourself as a freedom fighter, it gives you a different set of questions to pose.
So Reverend Sekou, there's a question about building a new society. In this new society, what are some of the main ingredients?
Well, in the new society, we of course got to have blues music, jazz, and gospel. Right. In part because African Americans have produced the greatest musical tradition in the history of the Western world. So we're going to have some of that. I think that part of what the elements of the new society include, you know, a civilization that's willing to judge its success on the life chances of the most vulnerable. So what is the lived conditions of the poor? Are there poor? Right? Does a society necessitate that? What are the lived conditions of those who are disabled? What are the lived conditions of women? What are the lived conditions of gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender persons, right? What are the lived conditions of racial minorities, right? Right. And so I would want to beg that question for us. What are the ways in which we're giving a preferential option to the historically othered? And that we begin from that starting point, and then we're always raising that question to ourselves, right? And so, in addition to the rich tradition in the history of the Western world, does everybody have something to eat? Do they have a decent place to stay? Are they free to live and work according to their own capacities?
Thank you, Reverend. At this moment, I'm going to call on Susan, who is having her hand raised.
Thank
Susan.
you, Uriah. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well. And see you too.
Okay. Well, I'm interested in the person who talked about national boundaries, which are political boundaries. And if I were doing the world over again, I would make them cultural boundaries or geographic boundaries, not political boundaries. There's a book that was written a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, called The 9 Cultural Nations of North America. I never forgot it. So it had reorganized North America based on culture. So that's what I would say.
Oh, you have the name of the book, Susan, so others can read it?
The 9 Cultural Nations of North America.
Okay, thank you. Thank
you
so
much. A much more rational way to organize ourselves on this planet than politically.
Okay.
Based on war and all that.
I'm writing it down myself. And at this moment, I think we are running out of time. I'm going to invite Shanta back again to make some closing comments and give us a strong call to action. Shanta?
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. I know it leaves us somewhat unsatisfied that we didn't have more time to talk this through. But that's the nature of this situation. Therefore, we are in a continuing conversation. We are not done today. We will have this going for several weeks more. So hold your thoughts and questions and ponder on these things. Talk to each other about these things, so that next time your questions will be more thoughtful and sharper, and you can bring this. We can make it a continuing conversation. I want to summarize very briefly the values that I heard from you during this conversation, and I may miss a lot of things. I will go back and think through again and read the transcript of the chat and listen to the recording so that I will get a better, clearer understanding. But for now, let's see if we can summarize. We talked about a new reality, a new eschaton, as Reverend Sekou called it, that we are approaching. And this is the feeling that we at Omnia also had, that as we look around the world, we are coming upon a time when people are clamoring for something new and different. It doesn't seem like it's a incremental change that we are looking for. We are looking for somewhat drastic change. So the questions such as defund the police, that's a drastic change. Although what that means, nobody knows yet, and we are all trying to figure this out. There are other thoughts that have come up that are similar to that. So what is the nature of this new reality? This Kairos moment we are in is a critical question for us to take forward. What are the theologies that are oppressive and what theologies are liberating is a question that Afri asked. That's, I think, a very important question for us. Many people on this call are religious people, religious leaders, some theologians, some philosophers of religion, some activists of religion. It's important for us to ask, what are some of those theologies that are confining us, oppressing us, and what's liberating? We asked questions around the values of our new reality. We talked about whether this ought to be non-violent, and Sekou raised some questions about that, about how we should think about non-violence differently or more deeply, more carefully. How inclusive should it be? What are the limits of inclusion is another question that came up. There seemed to be a lot of conversation, at least on the chat, about capitalism and about money and about the role of capitalism in this new society. That's a very big question, of course, but I think an important one, because money drives all of this, and the use of capital, I think, is an important one. We talked about diversity. We talked about, how diverse and a new society ought to be, including Suzanne's comment about borders. Political borders are a very serious matter. If if we were having this conversation a few months ago or even a year ago, we would be talking about our southern border and what's going on, what the government is doing to children in the southern border. So the border question is a very important question, it seems to me, and what kind of diversity are we talking about within this? So I wanted to sort of make the distinction between white supremacy and white nationalism. There's a white nationalism that includes borders, white supremacy that includes the supremacy question across the board, how people are hierarchically organized. The very important question from Dawn and the comment from Charlene are, I think, very important. How do we become freedom fighters for each other? No, that is also not correct. How do we become freedom fighters? Because Sekou's fight is my fight. Afri's fight is my fight. It is not enough to say I am your ally. It is not enough to say I'm going to come to work with you, to join with you in the struggle when it is convenient to me to do so. That's a very important question. I think we are, because you see, at the end of the day, it's about coming back to theology again. At the end of the day, it is about salvation. It is about how my salvation is tied up with your salvation. That's a very important concept for us. When your salvation is at risk, my salvation is at risk. And therefore, I can't say to you, I'll be your ally and pat you on the back and say, go do what you have to do. No, you can't do that. I have to be in the ground with you, because otherwise I compromise my own salvation. There is my own self-interest. Those are some of the thoughts that I am taking forward. Do you have anything more to add to that, or a comment on that, anyone? We will give you a couple of minutes to make such comments. If not,
on the question,
Charlene, yes, please. Go ahead, Charlene.
Yes. you know, a while ago, I have a lot of diversity in relationship with people. And so I was talking to a white sister and, you know, saying that I'm intentional about that. It doesn't just happen. I have to be intentional. And so one of the things that kind of came out when I was talking to her is that, well, she has an interest in diversity, but there's no intention. And I think that's what comes with white privilege. There's no intention. Black people have to be intentional because this is a part of our reality. And so I think one of the things in confronting white supremacy and racism is there has to be more intentionality on the part of white people. It's a privilege. They don't have to do it. We're forced to. It's our lived reality. So that would be my final comment.
Thank you. Any other final comments?
I had a helpful insight from Sekou in terms of being freed from limited understandings of violence, that we need to have a wider understanding of the way violence operates than simply physical or forceful violence. That if it is a value that of a new reality, of a new eschaton. So that was helpful for me.
Thank you. One or two more comments. We are going to go 5 minutes longer than intended.
I quickly want to acknowledge what Afri said about go read and get to know. The other day I was watching the movie The Birth of a Nation, and I was just blown away by how little I knew about all of these, and my commitment to really read and understand more.
I want to say thank you to each person. Reverend Sekou or Afri, do you have a final comment? Okay. I want to say thank you to everybody for participating. As I said, this is... No, Afri, you had something.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say quickly, you know, we study diversity and inclusion. That we have churches that are multicultural, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's time now for, instead of white people just studying diversity and inclusion, but to study anti-racism and to face that.
Thank you. Yes, very important.
Shanta, I also, there was a question in the chat by Sarah Motley. She asked if the session will be available to see on video. And I think you said it was recorded on Facebook. I was actually also wondering for myself as well, because I actually tried to find the OMNIA group on Facebook and was having trouble, like how we could find the video.
Thank you. Yes, I think that our Facebook feed did not work. I don't know why, but it didn't. I don't think it went through. So what I will do is I will put this on a Google Drive because it's too large for to email to you all. I'll put this recording there, and I will email you a link so that you have a continuous. We'll make a folder for that, so that you will have continuous access to this conversation. I want to say that next time we meet, I'm sorry, did Reverend Sekou, did you want to say a final word?
Yes, I just want to challenge us all to, if we are able, physically and health-wise, to go and be in a protest, be observe and look and learn. And if you can't be in a protest, figure out how to give water to people, to open up your houses of prayer, and to do so not necessarily knowing what the end is going to be, but with an openness to what God might be saying to you in the process. So you won't get it right, you'll make mistakes, you'll feel uncomfortable. But what are the ways in which you can offer up your life in the ways that you can, that allow you to engage in an undoing of your own internalized racism? The great novelist Tolstoy says that I wake up every morning trying to squeeze the slave out of me drop by drop. So how are we working out our salvation, our redeemed? How are we on the way in our encounter and striving for nirvana? And so do what you can to be in proximity of these acts of resistance, and then reflect upon them as a means of your own spiritual development.
Thank you very much. It's a good word to end on. Let me say that next week when we meet, we will have some young people here. Not that our presenters today were not young, although he doesn't claim it. He is a young man. Sekou is. I don't know about Afri. Are you? No. But we will have some very young people, 20s, 30s people, who are poets and artists and people who want to express themselves with those media. And they will tell us about their perspective on the same question. After we do that, our intention is to go to the ground in places like Nigeria and Sri Lanka and Bangladesh and hear from our partners there about the challenges that are going on and how we might learn to be freedom fighters with them and make their concerns our concerns as well. That brings us to the end of our time. I want to invite you to come back and participate next week and for the next several weeks. Particularly if you're isolating at home, this will probably be a good thing to do. Invite your friends and let them know about this important conversation. Your contributions, I hope, were helpful. All the contributions, I hope, were helpful to sharpen up your thinking, but it certainly did ours. So I appreciate that from everyone. Thank you very much, everybody. That concludes our time together. I apologize for going 8 minutes extra, but I hope you will, that's okay. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and we will see you next week, I hope.
Next
Bye-bye.
week.
Thank you.
Say thank you to Benjamin.
Particularly thank you to Benjamin and Soraya and Sekou and Afri for your contribution.
For sure. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Shanta, one thing I was thinking of in terms of the recording is if I don't know if OMNIA has a YouTube, but you're able to upload. You can upload. It can take a while for a big video, but you can upload the video to YouTube, and I could still share that on Facebook if you wanted. Because I saw that Charlotte said that.
We can do that. Yes, we do have a YouTube account, so I will send to everybody. I'll send it to everybody.
Cool. Well, yeah, that was just an idea. A tech idea. Goodbye.
Benjamin, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right.
Daisy Roy.
You remember this? You don't know Daisy. She's from